Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are digging into the story of the Berlin Wall. Now this was so much more than just a scar of concrete and wire. For almost 30 years, it was a structure that physically split the entire world in two.
I want you to just imagine this for a second. You go to a friend's house, maybe just across the street. You stay the night, but when you wake up the next morning, a wall is there, and you can never, ever go home again. It sounds like something out of a crazy movie, right? Well, for the people of Berlin on August 13, 1961, this was their shocking new reality.
And we're not talking about a small fence here. This was a barrier that stretched for 155 kilometers, a brutal mix of barbed wire and concrete blocks that completely encircled West Berlin, sealing it off from the rest of East Germany.
But you know the most unbelievable part of all of this? This massive city-splitting division was thrown up in just a single night. While the city slept, thousands were trapped and families were torn apart in an instant.
Okay, so how on earth could something so drastic happen so incredibly fast? To get to the bottom of that, we first have to look at the official story, the public reason that the East German government gave the world. And it all centered on one massive crisis.
That crisis was something called a brain drain. Basically, East Germany was hemorrhaging its most valuable people. We're talking doctors, engineers, scientists, you name it. All the skilled workers were leaving.
And the numbers? They are just staggering. By 1961, 2.5 million people had packed up and left for the West. That's nearly a fifth of the entire population. As you can imagine, this was absolutely crippling the communist state's economy. So the government's official line was this: we need an anti-fascist protection barrier. Notice the language there. They claimed it wasn't to keep their own citizens in, but to stop the West from orchestrating an economic collapse.
But to really get why this brain drain was happening in the first place and why the wall was really built, we've got to zoom out a bit. We have to understand that Berlin wasn't just one city. It was two completely different worlds, the absolute front line in the Cold War.
This slide here does a great job of breaking it all down with a simple analogy. Think of it like a bakery. In the Communist East, 10 bakers make 100 cakes and everyone gets paid the same no matter how hard they worked. Well, pretty soon motivation just tanks. But in the capitalist West, the best bakers, the ones who make the most or the best cakes, they get paid more. That competition drives everyone to work harder, to innovate, and that's why so many skilled people were drawn to the West.
But here's the twist. The brain drain? It was a really convenient public excuse. The real reason for the wall, the one nobody was talking about, was far more secretive. It was about a hidden war, a war of espionage being fought right under the streets of Berlin. And this brings us to something called Operation Gold. See, at the time, all of the most important Soviet military communications flowed through underground cables in East Berlin. So, the CIA and Britain's MI6 came up with this incredibly audacious plan. Let's dig a tunnel from West Berlin to East Berlin and literally tap into the enemy's most secret phone calls.
I mean, this was an incredible feat of engineering. In 1954, they actually did it. They built a 450-meter tunnel right under the border. For 11 solid months, they listened to everything, recording millions of conversations. Then, in 1956, the Soviets staged this big show of accidentally discovering the tunnel. The West thought it was this huge intelligence victory. They celebrated big time. But what if the whole thing was a lie? What if the KGB, the Soviet spy agency, knew about that tunnel before the first shovel even hit the dirt?
Well, the answer comes down to one man, George Blake. He was a high-ranking officer in MI6, a key planner on Operation Gold. He was also a double agent, secretly working for the KGB. He was a committed communist who had told his Soviet handlers everything.
So the KGB knew everything from day one. But here's the brilliant part of their plan. Instead of stopping the tunnel, they let it happen. They let the West spend all this money and time, and they just fed them useless or even deliberately misleading information. Why? To protect their most valuable spy inside British intelligence, George Blake.
And that, right there, brilliantly illustrates the real motivation. Operation Gold was a wake-up call for the Soviets. It showed them just how vulnerable they were. They realized the only way to truly stop spies operating out of West Berlin was to seal the city off completely, permanently. The brain drain wasn't the cause. It was the perfect cover story. So this imposing wall stood for 28 years, the symbol of global division. And when it finally came down, it wasn't because of some great battle or a political treaty. No, it was brought down by a bureaucratic mistake, a single confused sentence.
So on November 9th, 1989, This East German official, Günter Schabowski, is giving a press conference. It's kind of boring, actually. He gets handed a note about some new, relaxed travel rules, but he hadn't really read it. So when a reporter asks when the new rules take effect, he kind of fumbles through his papers, shrugs, and says these words that would change history.
Now, he was completely wrong. The changes were supposed to be announced the next day in a much more orderly way. But it was too late. The news just exploded. Within hours, thousands, then tens of thousands of East Berliners were at the checkpoints demanding to be let through. The guards had no idea what to do, they had no new orders, and faced with this massive, joyful crowd, they just opened the gates. And the fall of the Berlin Wall? I mean, this was so much more than a local party in Germany. It was a political earthquake that sent shockwaves across the entire globe and completely redrew the map of the 20th century.
Think of it as the first domino to fall in a huge chain reaction. The wall's collapse shattered the idea of communist power. That sparked uprisings all over Eastern Europe, and just 2 years later, the Soviet Union itself, the power that propped the whole system up, just dissolved. The Cold War was over, and the era of globalization we live in today began.
And really, that's the ultimate takeaway here. The Berlin Wall was never just a wall. It was the physical, brutal embodiment of the Iron Curtain. It was the front line of a global ideological war. So its fall wasn't just about liberating a city. It signaled the end of an entire era.
And that leaves us with a final question to chew on. If the fall of one physical wall in one city could completely reshape the globe, it really makes you wonder, what are the invisible walls, the ideological divides that are shaping our world right now? Thanks for watching.